Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Finance, Business, and Purpose podcast. I'm here today with our special guest, Sara Alvarado, or Sarita. Welcome. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being on the show. We were recently introduced from one of my former students, Yasmin, who's just incredibly amazing and inspiring. And she said that you have to be on the podcast. So I did not question that at all. But yeah, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell folks a little bit about who you are?
Awesome. Thank you. So my name is Sara Alvarado, and I am a white woman. I live in Madison, Wisconsin, married to a Mexican man. We have two multicultural bilingual kids. And it's important for me because my last name is Alvarado. I never want to misrepresent as not being identifying as white. And what I do is so many things. I'm a slasher, I would say, but I usually just tell people I'm a writer, I'm a speaker, and I work in the intersection of racial justice and real estate. And I love to dance and play and have fun and make the most out of life.
So cool. I can't wait to hear more. I saw that on your website about the intersection of real estate, racial justice, and already sent your website over to one of my best friends who's a real estate agent. I actually had her on the show several episodes ago. But yeah, I can't wait to hear more. So yeah, how did you get involved in this intersection and going from, I guess, probably just traditional real estate to incorporating this social justice mission?
Yeah. So I think I've always been justice oriented. But when my husband and we met in Mexico and our first son was born there. And when we moved to Madison, I needed to make money. And I had been living in Mexico for 3 years and couldn't easily get a job. And my husband was working on his green card at the time. So I got my real estate license. So it was really a backup plan. I grew up in real estate. My dad had real estate growing up. And then I was just really good at it. So I excelled. My husband joined me a couple of years later. We ended up opening our own brokerage. And we also had 2 little kids. So we were like head down, just trying to, run the business, raise these little guys, and weren't really aware. Also, our industry doesn't teach us how to see the inequities, right? Like it's all like, oh, racial covenants and the historical context of all of the bad things that happened, like that was in the past. This is now everything, so we were working with a lot of Spanish speaking clients, and then there was a race to equity report that came out in 2013. And that was really just focused on where the inequities and disparities were between Black and white families in the Dane County area compared to Wisconsin, compared to nationally. And the numbers are horrible. I mean, just at every single level. And at the same time, my oldest son was around 12 or 13, and he had an experience on the soccer field. And he's light skinned. And it really, within that week, it was a really monumental week because that happened with him, where I was questioning how I was raising our kids. And like, we're not talking about race enough. If, like whatever had happened on the soccer field, it was, he didn't really want to engage in the conversation. And I'm like, that's not who we are. But then I was like, but who are we then? How are we doing this? At the same time that I was, learning more, which is stuff I should have known, right? Like, I think also as a white person, it's easy to just not know things, even if you're in an interracial marriage, just to be bluntly honest about it, right? So
For sure.
I did a deep dive, and I just got really honest with who I was as a person, how I was perpetuating biases and stereotypes, and how I was raised, and just started questioning a lot. And that leads you into your own industry if you're really, open to looking at it. So it was a couple of years later that I started looking at like, how are we running our business? And it's amazing how much information there is out there, but that you have to go search for it. Maybe it's coming out more and more now, but 2013 to 2018, like it wasn't a conversation people wanted to have. And still now people don't really want to talk about it.
Yeah, that's very impressive that you were willing to look inward and take that personal responsibility with this, and also do so before it was, the more of a hot issue like it is now, right?
Yeah.
Like things really changed a couple years ago, it felt like, in terms of racial justice being more on the public mind, right? Talked about in the public narrative in the media. So I really commend you for taking the initiative and also not only looking inward, but at your industry. So what happened when you did look at your business and see how things were playing out in this sense?
Well, the first thing was we had a small brokerage, and it was very white. My husband was working more in the back end, and I was very much the front-facing leader of the company. And I remember one person asked me at one point, "Oh, are you applying for the minority grants?" And I was like, "Because I'm a woman, or because Carlos is Mexican? Like what?" Because I didn't even think of myself genderized. I was raised by feminist parents, but then even that question, I was like, "You're right." I mean, it's so embarrassing to even say it, but like just looking around, like, yeah, all the brokerages are owned by men, all of the industry leaders. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. So
Right.
the amount of white male dominance in our industry is pretty intense. So paired that with what could we actually do? And one of my first reactions was, well, I don't know how to desegregate neighborhoods. Like, how am I supposed to do that? How do realtors do anything? Like, I'll work with anyone. And I do think that that's what the industry and the systems want. They want us to feel like it's too complicated and there's nothing we can do.
Yeah.
So we had two things that we wanted to do right away, which is have Carlos take leadership of the company. And we started fresh. And since then, now we have an incredibly diverse team. And he is running the company. And then we were also looking at ways to financially contribute to specifically Black and Brown homeownership programs. So if in looking at our book of business, again, we were serving a lot of white families and a lot of Latino families, but really very few Black families. And when we looked at the history of how much anti-Blackness specifically there is in real estate, like 100% of covenants and restrictions nationwide acknowledge, you can't sell to Black families, or like but sometimes there's Jewish, sometimes there's Irish, like sometimes they have others, but 100% of the time it addresses of Ethiopian descent or whatever. So we were like, well, if our clientele isn't that, if we're not actually supporting that, where can we financially contribute to people that are, or organizations or nonprofits that are? And we couldn't find any. And this is where we started deep diving into, because you can't fund homeownership initiatives based on race. So if you're going to give money for housing, it has to be because of this because of the fair housing law that was passed in 1968. You now can't, like, at that point, it was like, okay, now you can't explicitly discriminate based on race. Up until 1968, you could. Right. And now after 1968, you can't explicitly fund based on race. So all of the folks that were explicitly denied are not able to receive funding.
I didn't know that. Is that an unintended consequence?
Yes.
Yeah.
100%. 100%. So a lot of the down payment programs, which are available to all because you can't make it race-based, are utilized by white people. And they're federally funded. So the restrictions are really tight. So basically, anytime there's federal money, a lot of times it's need-based. So you can't make more money than X. You can only buy a house in this zip code. You have to have additional inspections, and it's not approved until XYZ. So if you're a seller and you have 5 offers, one of them has a down payment assistance contingency on it, and then you've got one with 20% down, or an FHA loan with 3% down. Where we used to have risky neighborhoods, we now have risky offers. Right. And it's based on money and who's got money and where the money is coming from. And if we understand how wealth is accumulated in real estate, up until 1968, people of color weren't able to access a huge asset building commodity, I guess you could say, right?
Which is not that long ago, and
Oh,
is how a
right.
lot of wealthy Americans build wealth, is through property.
Yeah, 100%. So like between 1930 and 1950, the government had all, that's when the 30-year fix came into play, and it was, 3% down, 30-year fix, super low rate. And everyone called that free money,
Yeah.
oh, let's jump in on that. And now when we're looking at trying to create down payment programs, the naysayer is like, oh, you're just giving away free money. That's not fair. You have to earn it. So even like how people talk about free money, it's like, wait a second, like this is okay, but this isn't okay. So that's where you see the racism. That's where, we saw it. And like, if you're talking about, you can't make too much money, but when you're talking about home ownership, you want people who can afford their mortgage. You don't want to put people in a situation that's,
Right.
going to be foreclosure, et cetera. So we were like, okay, well, we don't know what to, like, how do we contribute financially to an organization? And these down payment assistance programs are actually really creating barriers. What would it look like if we created our own? And how would we get around the Fair Housing Act? So we actually looked at creating a down payment program that's not federally funded, that comes from the real estate industry and the private sector. And we partnered with a school in Madison that is 85% of the families are families of color. And it's led by a Black leader, and it's really focused on trying to get rid of that education gap, achievement gap. So knowing that we're offering this down payment money to families at the school, One City Schools, no, it's available to all. So we're in compliance with the Fair Housing Act. The majority of families, everyone that's taken advantage of it has been people of color, Black and brown. And then the money comes from the real estate industry, in that like if we are able to contribute a portion or a percentage of our commission at the time of closing to the down payment fund. And so it's like, how could we create a sustainable model where the real estate industry is owning up to harm caused?
Wow.
Granted, the majority of our money has come from community and neighborhood associations and churches. We see the vision of what the real estate industry could do if they actually step into this, because every time there's a closing, you've got a realtor, a broker, a lender, and a home inspector, an insurance agent, a title company, very white dominated industries.
Yep. With big money. And it reminds me a lot of the IOLTA programs in state bars and the legal profession, where they will have a part of the bar dues that the attorneys pay every year go toward pro bono work, funding nonprofit legal services.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So like,
it's really genius that you came up with that.
And we're hoping that the real estate industry as a whole can see the value of it. I mean, they ask us for money for politics all the time. That's like into our association dues.
Yeah. It's funny how some of this is just kind of normalizing it, because I could totally see where your vision of like maybe 10 years from now, it's just the norm. That's what you do. You always give a percentage to this fund, right? Probably wouldn't even make a big difference for them.
Yeah.
That is incredible.
Yeah. And then we were able to strip the restrictions. So we don't have an income restriction. It's actually approved money that's earmarked. So it doesn't show up on their offer to purchase. It literally looks like family money. Like if I get family money, the bank actually has, their policy allows for family money, but not for other types of money. And like, again, if you understand the history, where does money come from? Through family. It's,
people who could buy property before.
Yeah.
Wow. So how are you all structuring this? Is it a nonprofit institution?
We got a fiscal sponsorship through the school, which is a nonprofit. So the money that people pay in, it's a 501c3. We were looking at it as a pilot program. And we want to go through all of the work it would take to become a nonprofit. We wanted to see if it would work first.
Yeah, of course. That makes a lot of sense.
That's why we did the fiscal sponsorship.
I've been hearing more examples of fiscal sponsorship lately. I really want to learn more. And I just have to say, I'm so excited because you're now the third person I've had on the podcast since I started talking more about social impact, where it's this like really innovative social impact entrepreneur like you, who is understanding how to like build these structures in this new world we're going into that is more social impact oriented, where you're like combining for-profit, private money for social impact, like with nonprofit structures involved. And for a while, I didn't know anyone doing that. And now 3 people, just happen to be at the podcast, like I found out are doing that. And I'm so excited that there's more and more folks, and hope this is providing an example for others. I know we wanted to talk about money too. So let's go there. Like, how has that played a role? Because this is a very social justice thing you're doing. I mean, we're talking about racial equity here, and it's straight up about money too. So how do you grapple with that?
Well, we do have like the process for accessing the $15,000 down payment funds is that the families have to go through 2 education courses. One is a wealth building course.
Okay.
One is a home ownership course. And some people just, they're in the wealth building course and it's like, all right, it's going to be a couple more years, because home ownership it's not a tomorrow thing. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of people are like, oh, I'm not ready. I'm not ready. If you're thinking about it, you're ready. It's just not, it takes longer to move into the house. Right. So like, I want that also to be a narrative shift in that if you're thinking about it, you're actually already doing it because you're thinking maybe about budgeting, about what an emergency fund is.
Right.
That first wealth building course, it really is an opportunity to talk about money and talk about how systems of oppression have created this financial institutions for white people to succeed. Yeah. And so if that is what's happening, then we need to shift that, and we need to acknowledge the whitewashing of financial literacy and redefine it. So our education program is Black and Brown led because representation matters, experience matters, and it creates community learning for people to challenge. We have families come in and be like, I went and I applied for a loan and I was denied, so I guess I can't be a homeowner. Period. Mm-hmm. And then they never go back, or nobody says, okay, but here's what you need to do. Or if you do XYZ in 6 months, we can look at it again. Like, it's like this, it's pervasive.
It's the same thing I hear constantly in our work in immigrant finance with investing. Yeah. People just get told they're not allowed to because they're an immigrant, or they get rejected. Yeah.
And so we need more people who are willing to challenge that process. Yeah. We need financial institutions to create jobs where literally that is like, if a lender's job is only to close deals and not to support people, when they give a denial, there's got to be someone right there that's willing to support that person in getting to where they need to go, because it's is possible. It's just a matter of having access. And that's when we talk about generational wealth. It's not just money, it's connections. It's who you know, it's education. So when we talk about money a lot as it relates to within the Black and Brown communities. We haven't had as many opportunities to talk about it within white communities. It feels like the people that have read the books, they're like opening their checkbooks and writing checks. And then we have folks who are just like, no, I earn this money and I'm, like, it's not about race, and white people are poor too, so. Yeah. But we have a long way to go.
Yes. And how has this played out for you in terms of making this space to put all this time into this social impact work for you, while also having a brokerage and having kids? And how have you kind of navigated the balance of business and social impact?
It was a family decision, so very intentional. Carlos and I basically were like, well, how much do we need to make? And even though we have the potential to make a ton, if both of us are selling real estate, what would it look like if, you spent more time over here? Because how much do we really, like, what is the point of what we're doing with our life? And Also, once
I
you
love
know
that.
something, it's hard to, like I said, it's hard to unsee it. So when you see it, like, why wouldn't you do something about it if you could? I don't
I
know.
I appreciate how clear that is for you. I think for a lot of people, there's so much that gets in the way, of taking the action, right?
Okay,
And
right. And so we were able to create a successful brokerage. Like if we were in the very beginning stages, I wouldn't
yeah,
be able to expend that much time, but we were in a place where we could have at least contributed financially. So like when we meet people who are like, it's hard to make it in real estate. So in those beginning stages, you don't have to do the time thing, but if you can just contribute financially a little bit,
yeah,
then you're part of the solution versus
right.
part of the problem. And I just happened to be at a point in our career where we could make that decision. So I mean, like I'm 48, I'm not 32.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, as we are talking about before we started recording, like that's part of being able to do it in a sustainable way, right? Like you didn't just leave your job when you were 25 for this social justice dream without a clear way of how to fund it, your own family's lifestyle and the work,
Yeah. No,
right?
that's really important. And I see that a lot just in terms of like, oh, I have this dream, I should, if I'm going to follow my dream, I need to quit my job. And I wish that we could rewrite that story too, because I think that that's sometimes creating more problems because when you have financial security, you can actually dream bigger. But if
Yeah.
you're just trying to pay your bills and you're worried, then you're coming from a place of desperation. So I remember in the early
Right.
stages of real estate when, like, if I needed to close a deal to pay our mortgage or our rent at that point, I didn't even own a house and I was selling houses. That people can feel that energy. So
Yeah.
it's like, how can you get into a place where you are secure and then you can go from there? So it's kind of like trusting the stages. It's
Mhm.
like that home ownership concept. It's not going to happen overnight, but how can you build the block so that then you can make a really good calculated risk?
And that's why I love that you all are teaching wealth building and some personal finance aspects because it starts with the budgeting and being able to start to get out of that survival mode so that you can think about your goals and build toward that.
Uh-huh. Yep. No, and we actually say it's not about home ownership. It's about understanding that home ownership is a tool,
Yeah.
but it's creating wealth and understanding how wealth works and how money works so that people can talk about it more. Like why it's almost like money and sex and politics and right. It's like this thing
The
that you're not
religion.
supposed to talk about. Yeah. And I'm like, let's talk about that.
I love it. You're such an example for people to really go for it with these things that you feel passionate about. And what lessons would you share for folks who might be feeling like how you were that time, with your son on the soccer field and realizing what's going on with this issue and not know exactly how to be involved, but knowing you want to do something? What advice would you give them?
I would, it's where's your community? Who's in your community? Who's in your cell phone? Who do you call when you need support? And are they creating that, that space for you? Because it's the people you surround yourself, it really does make a difference. So if I have someone that I can talk to that shares the same values and feels strongly about it. I mean, that's kind of how we created the Own It team. Was we just found like-minded people who were just as passionate and who were like, yeah, let's do something about it. And then to be able to learn from them, right? Like how diverse is your community so that I'm not just surrounded by other white people who also haven't seen what I've seen,
Yeah.
that kind of who you surround yourself with, I think is that's been the biggest help for me.
That's great advice. Thank you for sharing that. I want to ask you also about your book coming out soon, Dreaming in
So it's
Spanish.
already out.
Is it out? Oh, great. Oh, okay. Awesome. For those of you watching on YouTube, you can see it's a beautiful cover. I love the
Thank
colors.
you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah, how did that happen?
I mean, the real quick story is same thing. I was like, I've always wanted to write a book, always, always. And I love this story of how Carlos and I met. I was in a really bad place when I went to Mexico. I was looking for some healing and needed to get my life together, was not expecting to meet him and marry him and get pregnant. And that's what happened. And so I wanted to tell that story. And it was one of those things where I was like, if I'm going to do it, I have to invest time into it and my own self. And so there was a lot of Saturdays and nights and writing retreats, and I just published it last week.
Congratulations. Oh, it sounds so good. I want to read it. I also met my husband in Latin America, in Ecuador, where he's from. So I'm like incredibly curious about your story.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Wow.
It's a trip. It's a trip. Well, for me, especially, you know, when I was pregnant, living there, being white and trying to fit in, you know, it was a struggle. And in telling the story, I had to share some kind of embarrassing, ignorant moments, but I also feel like we need to know that, you know, it's not necessarily our fault that we were raised to not see things. And then when we have the opportunity to see them, then we can, again, like, how do we learn to change? But that, I think, was the hardest part in writing the book, was definitely being true to who I was at that point, knowing what I know now.
Well, I was going to ask you, how does it connect to the racial justice work? And now I see it, because you're showing your own learnings and journey. And I think that's really important for bringing along other people with you who might be at that point, and being like, look, I'm being vulnerable. I also had to learn these things. Like, that's how we're going to change things, for people to have those honest conversations. So I really appreciate that. And I know you do speaking. And so I just love how you're like doing all these incredible, really interesting things. Is there kind of like something you see 5-10 years from now where all this is going?
Oh gosh, I hope I can write more books, and I hope I can just continue to be part of a community that is fighting for a better world for people, and willing to challenge the systems. I think that's where I see myself, is consistently looking for ways to challenge the status quo and to question why things are the way they are and how they can be better. And I do want to write more books.
Oh, it's so exciting. I want to write a book too. I'm like dying to do it. Yeah. I really, it's coming up more and more.
Okay, well, yes. Like,
we should talk. Yeah.
Yes. It just starts with, like, even just journaling.
Yeah.
Like, what do you want to write about? Like, you just start writing it. I don't know. There's different ways, but if you're thinking about it, you already started it.
And that applies to anyone listening who's also thinking about it, for sure, as well. You're giving so many good nuggets here. I know you've already given so much wisdom and advice. Is there anything else you want to share for folks interested in these topics, or kind of exploring how to build social impact work into their career?
I guess notice what pisses you off.
Perfect. That's a great way to say it.
Like, if you get pissed about something, that's usually something there's some passion in there, and then you can turn that into, you know, follow that and go towards that. Yeah. I mean, obviously follow what gets you excited, but I got really pissed off the more I learned about how the real estate industry works. And that's worked for me.
Amazing. So succinct. I love it. Where can people connect with you, support you, get your book, all the things?
Yes, thank you. I can't wait to talk to you more about your book, though. So we're gonna my website, saraalvarado.com, and I'm on the socials.
Amazing.
Yeah, Sara Alvarado.
We'll link it all in the show notes. Thank you so much for taking the time. It was wonderful to connect.
Thank you.
I know we'll have many more conversations. I have a feeling that will be great. Thank you. Take care. Bye for now, everyone.